Man, I bet you've been looking at those Retribution Paladins and those Protection Paladins and thinking, dude, did the devs forget about us, Holy Paladins as well? Maybe not, but definitely not now, because in 10.1.5 you are getting a rework on Holy Paladin. Mini rework, major rework, okay, there's a bunch of stuff that's happening specifically to the talents most of all, but the Holy Paladin spec is definitely taking through a shift in terms of what it's supposed to do. Hopefully this will fix a lot of issues with Holy Paladins today, the boring gameplay, the RNG reliance, the little throughput, which is also kind of due to tuning, but with the changes to the playstyle and the talents choices and the build variety, hopefully this will be fleshed out, because 10.1.5 is looking like a solid patch. And if you like the content that we do, consider checking our Patreon page and supporting the channel. We have a link to it down in the description. There are a bunch of tiers that you can opt for if you want to support us in a different way. There are goodies for you to, you know, take advantage of if you are so inclined. And we would super appreciate you considering supporting our content and having more of these videos done in the future for you. Now let's take a look at what exactly changed. I'm not gonna go through all of the little changes because since we've tested it on the PTR a day before and today now as we're recording it, there have been already changes and likely there's gonna be more changes to what they've added so far into the talent tree. So what we have so far is probably better to take into consideration to what the devs essentially want for the spec to accomplish by their blue post that they've launched a few days ago to kind of figure out where they want to take the spec. First of all, they talked about meaningful choices for Holy Paladin, and to quote, the previous tree layout and talent nodes did not offer as much choice between content as we'd like. A main goal of this update is to encourage diversity between talent builds so gameplay feels varied between content and encounter types. To achieve this goal, we're taking a hard look at the tuning and integration of underrepresented talents to ensure they are both competitive and can fit within multiple builds. This is something that we've seen done for other specs as well in the past, so this is not necessarily surprising, but definitely very appreciated because the talent tree is definitely fun as a concept. So the fact that we're not using like a lot of the choice nodes and points and all of that stuff is kind of a shame. So yes, that they're taking a closer look at this. More so than this, they mentioned that too many talents felt like they worked for only one playstyle, but not another. This is generally fine in moderation, but was rampant throughout the Holy Paladin tree. True. We're aiming to have more talents that have functionality for multiple builds as to encourage experimentation throughout the tree. This will all come along with the new addition to the tree intended to support new playstyles. This is essentially what we mentioned before, where you kind of felt like a cookie cutter build, like you pretty much took only these talents because they were just really stronger, way stronger than everything else, and neglected a bunch of other options as well. And some of this probably rely heavily on the Glimmer playstyle versus the caster playstyle, which has been kind of not necessarily a meme, but has been something that people have been talking about ever since Glimmer was introduced. Now, if you look at the current version of the talent tree, although this might still change by the time you watch this video, so I don't know, but Glimmer of Light has been moved all the way at the top just below Holy Shock, as opposed to being a capstone. This is very good because Glimmer of Light, whether you like it or not, has been a core implementation of the spec, and it is something that Holy Paladins cannot be without. Let's be honest here, Holy Paladin has undergone a shift ever since, I believe, mid-BFA when they introduced Glimmer of Light, and Holy Paladins decided, oh, this is a way more efficient way to heal. Obviously, ever since then, Glimmer of Light has undergone a lot of changes, and even now, on the 10.1.5 PTR, you'll notice that it does not function the way the live one does. So just to go over it really quick, Glimmer of Light baseline right now will essentially put Glimmer on 3 targets, and it will reflect the damage or healing of it by quite a bit. It's 192 spell power for damage and 228% spell power for healing. These are big numbers considering they're double the numbers of Holy Shock, which is really good. But this is of course reduced based on how many targets are affected. You currently can only put it on 3 targets, but if you keep going down on the left side, you'll see a choice node that has Glimmer of Light augmentation talents. First of all, you have Illumination, which makes Glimmer of Light affect 5 additional targets, bringing it all the way up to 8. Now, the numbers are obviously subject to change, and I imagine that once this is implemented properly, the 8 targets, if you have Glimmer on 8 targets, it will probably do similar numbers as they do now, with Glimmer already being on 8 targets. But the other choice now, which is probably more interesting, at least in my opinion, is Blessed Focus. That kind of shifts a little bit how Holy Paladin does its healing. Blessed Focus makes Glimmer of Light healing and damage increase by 10%. Once again, the numbers can change, but it can only affect one target at a time. Now add these 10% on top of what it already does, and you essentially have probably a stronger Holy Beacon, right? Because you will have a beacon out on a target, and I would imagine maybe Glimmer of Light on a different target, and you heal a third target, and the healing cleaves on both of the other 2 targets, which is pretty cool, considering that your single target healing will cleave onto 2 additional ones. Not unheard of for any other healer. We know other healers do this as well, but obviously you can double down. You can put it on 1 target, and you can just nuke tank healers. I feel like this will definitely make Holy Paladins even stronger as a tank healer. Now, whether or not these will be played in the end, we don't know, but we can, you know, at least talk about them. And going down into the cool new changes for Glimmer of Lights, all the way to the bottom left, you have new capstones. First of all, semi-capstone in true fashion to the Paladin design, you have Daybreak. Daybreak is a 1-minute cooldown, and what it does is absorbs your active Glimmer of Light, triggering their effects at 100% value and granting 4,000 mana per Glimmer of Light consumed. 4,000 mana is just in the tooltip. But even so, 4,000 mana on a 1-minute cooldown can probably end up being quite a bit, although I'm not essentially familiar with Holy Paladins ever having mana issues, but seemingly has the playstyle will undergo some shifts, then likely maybe mana will become a more integral part of your kit. But this is really cool, and Daybreak is fine on its own, but then you actually have the capstone, Rising Sunlight. These naming senses are really cool, actually. After casting Daybreak, your next 3 Holy Shocks cast 2 additional times. Well, that's very interesting, because this gives you a burst healing option on a 1-minute cooldown. And we know for sure that, you know, Holy Paladin kind of relies on cooldown to do burst healing. This is essentially and I am a big fan and proponent of 1-minute cooldowns. This is really cool, because it definitely doubles down into Glimmer of Light, and I'm so glad that they've added more depth and more layers of playstyle on top of Glimmer, which was pretty consistent over the years, and now you actually have some interesting things going on. This is really cool. And this kind of ties into their rotational updates that they've mentioned. To quote the devs, there are a few core rotational changes that we're implementing to slow down the expenditure of generators that do not heal. Crusader striking, everybody? Holy Paladin felt like too many globals were being spent on damaged abilities purely to generate holy power, which did not feel right for a healer specialization. Very true. We're considering removing Radiant Onslaught, which is a talent currently that you can see on the talent tree, which essentially makes so that Crusader Strike has 2 charges. So they're considering removing Radiant Onslaught to address this, but are going to wait for more testing before deciding on that change. I am a proponent for this. I think having 2 Crusader Strike to effectively heal is fun, and it is very crucial, and I personally like the playstyle, but it has become such an efficient way of dealing your healing that every other way of healing has become really pushed to the side. So what they're saying is that they also think a few abilities that seemed core were not completely integrated into the kit, such as Judgment and Shield of the Righteous. These abilities see significant use but often felt separate from the regular rotational flow. Addressing this will be a key goal of the update. Yes, reducing the time Holy Paladin spent dealing damage without healing allows for a steadier stream of healing and more time to focus on triaging. Overall, we'd like Holy Paladins to be more focused on when, where, and if their healing should be used, as opposed to what they are now. And I think this is really cool. There are awesome changes to Judgment that affect a bunch of stuff right now. First of all, you know, you have the greater judgment in the talent tree, the general talent tree, but what's really cool is that you tie these into some really good rotational changes that have been very asked for by the Holy Paladin community, and it kind of is being reflected by the Awakening talent, which is still a talent close to the bottom, still a 2-pointer, but it has been changed. So what it does now is when you use Holy Power, when you spend Holy Power, you gain Awakening. At 8 stacks of Awakening, your next Judgment deals 30% increased damage, will critically strike, and activate Avenging Wrath for 10 seconds. I think all of the Holy Paladins have rejoiced at this change, because right now their wings are no longer RNG. You can control them, you can plan them, you can see when they're becoming available, and you can activate them exactly when you need to. giving you more control. So have this tied in with the new Daybreak and all of the other cooldowns that you have for Holy Paladin, and you're essentially weaving your rotation a lot better. You have more control, you can heal more, and there's a bunch of other changes to Infusion of Light as well that make it so casting as well can be woven into your actual rotation. Essentially what they meant with the Infusion of Light, and I'm gonna code them again, Infusion of Light's high uptime and low use rate has been concerning for us, because you kind of ignored it a bunch of times, right? I remember this because I've played it in Shadowlands. I didn't know if it was true for Dragonflight as well, but it seems like it is still true that Infusion of Light is sometimes ignored. We'd like to make this more spendable, but also appear less often as to be a real moment of empowerment that feels good to capitalize on. We're hoping the redesign of Greater Judgment and addition of Judgment to the spells that can consume Infusion helps this proc feel more impactful for every build. This is, of course, really cool, and it kind of paints a picture as to where they want the Paladin to, at least the Holy Paladin, to be in terms of healing. You have these little moments of awesomeness, of empowerment when you heal more, which is kind of true for what Holy Paladin has been doing so far. So for anybody who hasn't checked it out, the Greater Judgment is a talent, and some of these talents in the general talent tree kind of work differently for each spec. For Holy, at the very least, Greater Judgment makes it so that Judgment deems a target unworthy, preventing the next damage that they deal to their target. Essentially, maybe you'll put this on the raid boss, and they prevent the damage that they deal to the tank. This is pretty good, and this is basically done in the Divine Revelations talent all the way to the left-hand side of the tree. What it does now, right now, without any further changes, is while empowered by Infusion of Light, Flash of Light heals for an additional 20%, Holy Light or Judgment refund 1% of your maximum mana. So you can get that mana back with Judgment as well. And 2 new changes have been made also in the talent tree for Judgment, or maybe 3 changes rather. First of all, you have Power of the Silver Hand, right smack dab in the middle of the talent tree. What this does is Holy Light, Flash of Light, and Judgment have a chance to grant you Power of the Silver Hand, increasing the healing of your next Holy Shock by 10% of all damage and effective healing you do within the next 10 seconds, up to a maximum of probably, I don't know, 50% of your HP. From the tooltip, this is kind of relevant. This is kind of cool. This is also very similar to what Preservation, or essentially Evokers, have with Scarlet Adaptation, where they bank up healing during their damage dealing or their healing dealing, and then they just explode it with one spell. This is really cool. You also have Righteous Judgment. Judgment has 50% chance to cast Consecration at the target's location. I mean, this is pretty cool. This is essentially making so that you don't have to worry about Consecration. Being on a 50% cast chance, you'll likely have a very high uptime on Consecration, especially if you Judgment on cooldown properly. Also, this does not factor into the limit of 1 Consecration up, because you can only have 1 Consecration up, but this can give you, let's say, multiple Consecrations. Now, whether or not this is going to be impactful depends to see on the content. But another change to Divine Glimpse is that Holy Shock and Judgment have a 8% increased critical strike chance, just to put more emphasis on Judgment being a core integral part of your rotation. And now, seeing as how Judgment also activates your Awakening, it's going to be something that you'll definitely want to consider when you play your Holy Paladin. And we've seen a lot of these new changes to mana as well. And I mean, we can probably assume that, you know, mana has never been an issue for Holy Paladin, but what do the devs think? Well, first of all, the nature of Holy Power being a mana-free resource is that the spenders must carry the mana weight, but Holy Paladin must constantly be generating to heal efficiently. This can lead to gameplay feeling punishing, with only a few abilities costing most of your mana, and there not being ways to avoid that being the case. To remedy this, we're looking at adding ways to generate mana through active play, or for there to be mana refunds in some situations. Alongside this, we're also investigating attaching a slight mana cost to Holy Power spenders and decreasing the cost of generators to even out the rate of expenditure. We'd love to hear feedback on this topic. So this is clearly being under their spotlight to see exactly where the mana is, because, you know, mana has been something that healers had to deal with. Not whether you like it or not, whether it's too old or not, it is something that managing it right can make the difference between a good healer and a great healer. And these are just some of the first changes that we're seeing to Holy Paladin. We're so anxious to see exactly how this will turn out in the end, because there's definitely going to be changes. We've seen a couple from yesterday to today, so we'll see how this also plays out in the end. But I think Holy Paladins are in for a treat, and I think Paladin as a class, as a whole, has undergone some of the most amazing changes in Dragonflight and spec shift throughout the entire World of Warcraft. What do you guys think? Do you think all of these changes will make you want to play Holy Paladin more? Check it on the 10.15 PTR. It's available for everybody to be tested out. Play, give the feedback to the devs so they can make the Holy Paladin be a fun and really engaging and useful healer. I mean, it's useful. Aura Mash is really good, but you know what I'm saying, okay? Bring back the love to Holy Paladin. Thank you, Patrons, for supporting the content, and see you in the next one. Love you guys. Bye-bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.